All government employees should realize that the process of collective bargaining, as usually understood, cannot be transplanted into public service. It has its distinct and insurmountable limitations when applied to public personnel management. The very nature and purposes of government make it impossible for administrative officials to represent fully or to bind the employer in mutual discussions with government employee organizations. The employer is the whole people. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Good evening, everyone. This is Hell's Unicorn once again, and it appears that the long-running stalemate over the issue of public sector union workers' collective bargaining rights in the state of Wisconsin is now over. It is finally finished. I will now proceed to read the article and offer my thoughts on it in the most concise way possible, because I'd like this issue to be put to bed once and for all. This can be found on the Comcast.net news site. I will provide a link in the description. This was written by Scott Bauer of the Associated Press, who is very most likely sympathetic to the cause of the union people in Wisconsin that have been essentially robbing the people of Wisconsin blind with unnecessary increases in wages and unnecessary strikes. And this is titled, Wisconsin GOP Bypasses Democrats, Cuts Collective Bargaining. The Wisconsin Senate succeeded in voting Wednesday to strip nearly all collective bargaining rights from public workers after Republicans outmaneuvered the chamber's missing Democrats and approved an explosive proposal that has rocked the state and unions nationwide. "You are cowards!" speculators in the Senate gallery screamed as lawmakers voted. Within hours, a crowd of a few hundred protesters inside the Capitol had grown to several thousand, more than had been in the building at any point during the weeks of protest. I'm willing to venture to guess that there may have been a riot in progress. "The whole world is watching," they shouted as they pressed up against the heavily guarded entrance to the Senate chamber. "That's right, we have a bunch of unruly people out here attempting to storm the halls of the state capitol, and therefore we need guards to keep these people out." What has happened to this country, you may ask? I'm not sure. But continuing on. All 14 Senate Democrats fled to Illinois nearly 3 weeks ago, preventing the chamber from having enough members presented to consider Governor Scott Walker's budget repair bill, a proposal introduced to plug a $137 million budget shortfall. The Senate requires a quorum to take up any measures that spends money, but Republicans on Wednesday took all the spending measures out of the legislation, and a special committee of lawmakers from both the Senate and Assembly approved the revised bill a short time later. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is perfectly legal. All you have to do is take the spending aspects out of it, and then you do not need a quorum. You simply need to have a vote amongst all those who are actually showing up to do their jobs, for crying out loud. Continuing on. The unexpected yet surprisingly simple procedural move ended a stalemate that has threatened to drag on indefinitely. Until Wednesday's stunning vote, it appeared that the standoff would persist until Democrats returned to Madison from their self-imposed exile. In 30 minutes, 18 senators undid 50 years of civil rights in Wisconsin. Oh, for the love of God. It's a civil right to essentially steal from the people. That's what happens when you get collective bargaining in public sector unions. The people are the employer. You're not dealing with some big fat cigar-toting businessman. You're dealing with regular everyday taxpayers, most of whom are not making $70,000 or $80,000 a year with free health care benefits and a guaranteed pension. But anyway, continuing on. Until Wednesday's stunning vote, it appeared the standoff would persist until Democrats returned to Madison. Their disrespect for the people of Wisconsin and their rights is an outrage that will never be forgotten, said Democratic Senate Minority Leader Mark Miller. Tonight, 18 Senate Republicans conspired to take government away from the people. The people elected them, you moron. Continuing on. The state assembly previously approved the original proposal and was set to consider the new measure on Thursday. Miller said in an interview that with the Associated Press, there is nothing Democrats can do now to stop the bill. It's a done deal, and hallelujah to that. The lone Democrat present on the special committee, Assembly Minority Leader Peter Barca, shouted that the meeting was a violation of the state's open meeting laws. The Senate chief clerk said hours later that the meeting was properly held. How do you have an open meeting when there's nobody to attend the meeting because all of the opposing party people have left the state? Just answer that for me. But continuing on. Senate convened within minutes of the committee meeting and passed the measure 18-1 without discussion or debate. And why not? There is no debate. Republican Senator Dale Schultz cast the lone no vote, probably in order to placate any union people in his district. Continuing. The jig is up now, Barker said. The fraud on the people of Wisconsin is now clear. What fraud, Mr. Barker? What fraud? Your governor ran on this issue with this stance. There is no fraud. You point to where a law was sidestepped in this process. There is none pointed to here because there wasn't one. Continuing on. Walker had repeatedly argued that collective bargaining was a budget issue because his proposed changes would give local governments the flexibility to confront budget cuts needed to close the state's $3.6 billion deficit. He has said that without the changes, he may have needed to lay off 1,500 state workers and made other cuts to balance the budget. Ergo, he just saved $1,500 jobs by doing this. Continuing. Walker said Wednesday night that Democrats had 3 weeks to debate the bill and were offered repeated opportunities to come back but refused. I applaud the legislature's action today to stand up to the status quo and take a step in the right direction to balance the budget and reform government, Walker said in the statement. The measure approved Wednesday forbids most government workers from collectively bargaining for wage increases beyond the rate of inflation. It also requires public workers to pay more toward their pensions and double their health insurance contribution, a combination equivalent to an 8% pay cut for the average worker. I got to tell you something. Over the course of the past 3 years, with the way the economy has been, being somebody who's self-employed, I've taken a much bigger pay cut than 8%. And you don't see me trying to storm the halls of government, though it is a tempting eventuality. Continuing on. Police and firefighters are exempt. Yes, you can't use that argument there. Walker's proposal touched off a national debate over union rights for public employees and prompted tens of thousands of demonstrators, most of them not from Wisconsin, to converge there in the capital city for weeks of protests. Wednesday's drama unfolded less than 4 hours after Walker met with GOP senators in a closed-door meeting. He emerged from the meeting saying senators were firm in their support of the bill. For weeks, Democrats had offered concessions on issues other than the bargaining rights, and they spent much of Wednesday again calling on Walker and Republicans to compromise. Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald said earlier that Republicans had been discussing concessions offered by Walker, including allowing public workers to bargain over their salaries without a wage limit. Several GOP senators facing recall efforts had also publicly called for a compromise. There was no compromise going on here. The only compromises being offered were Democrats were compromising for more of what they wanted so that they wouldn't continue the current shenanigans. That's not a compromise. That's exploitation. Continuing on. The people of Wisconsin elected us to come to Madison and do a job. Yes, they elected them to do what they did. There was no fraud. Continuing on. Fitzgerald said in a statement after the vote, just because the Senate Democrats won't do their job doesn't mean we won't do ours. Union leaders weren't happy with Walker's offer and were furious at the Senate's move to push the measure forward with a quick vote. Phil Neuenfeld, president of the Wisconsin State AFL-CIO, said after Wednesday's vote that Republicans exercised a nuclear option. Scott Walker and the Republicans' ideological war on the middle class and working families is now indisputable, Neuenfeld said. While talks had been going on sporadically behind the scenes, Republicans in the Senate also had publicly tried to ratchet up pressure on Democrats to return. They had agreed earlier Wednesday to start fining Democrats $100 a day for each legislative session that they've missed. And that concludes the article. Okay, so as I stated earlier, I want to put this issue to bed, so I'm not going to spend much more time on it. I'm just going to state the following. A lot of people that have criticized me in private message over this issue need to understand a few things. I've actually been accused of, wanting to oppress middle and lower class people, that I'm not a thinking person. In fact, I got into an argument with somebody on Facebook over this, and he accused me of, and you'll love this, he actually accused me of thinking too much, and that he simply stated that I needed to, quote-unquote, just get to work. And then he asked me if I'd ever worked hard for anything in my life. Like, this guy has any idea as to how somebody who doesn't live in the same state as him, he doesn't even live in Wisconsin. I think he lives out in the Midwest somewhere else, but he's a union worker. As if he, were one to tell who actually works hard and who doesn't. I mean, I'm not a union worker because, well, I'm a farmer. There is no union here. I own my own land, and I work it. It's that simple. I haven't helped to build any high-rises. I haven't done any stuff like that. But trust me, I know what a hard day's work consists of, and I see less money for it than you assholes in Wisconsin, and particularly you teachers, are seeing currently. $77,000 a year on average? Oh, come on. Most people, supposed working class, blue collar people that are not union workers, don't make that kind of money. Alright, so spare me this class warfare BS. You guys are an elite class unto yourselves. You guys actually have the ability to not only strike, but to actually get everything you want, because people are dependent on the things you provide. Yes, even firefighters and policemen. As far as I'm concerned, none of you people have the right to strike. When you sign that contract and become a public servant, that's what you do. All right? I don't want to hear about this anymore. That's literally the point I've gotten to here. I'm not dancing in the streets, and I don't take pride in being a part of what is commonly now called as union busting. I am simply supporting an issue of necessity here. That's the way that it is right now. What we have in practice right now is completely unsustainable. We have a ballooning national debt. We have ballooning state debts. The interest alone on what we already owe is all but insurmountable to overcome. I mean, there is some logic behind the idiotic ravings of people like Paul Krugman, who say that we need to start a war with somebody in order to get the economy going, because that's what we've driven ourselves to. We shouldn't have to be at the point, we don't have to be at the point we're at right now. We've basically done this to ourselves. We don't make anything here anymore. The only thing that we really have worth exporting right now, other than, hired hands, is military assets. And I'm as much of an opponent of our current foreign interventionism policy as anyone else on the left. But the truth is that right now that's all we've got left, and it doesn't even come close to covering the full spectrum of our budget debt right now. It accounts for maybe a fifth of our spending. Everything else is domestic entitlements. And no matter what you cut, somebody's going to complain about it. So, you guys over in the public sector unions, you're calling on all of us to sacrifice. Well, you know something? If that's the case, you got to do the same thing. All right? Time to take your medicine. With prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.